Hong Kong, one of the richest cities in the world, with billionaires controlling assets worth billions of dollars. But it's also one of the most unequal in terms of income levels, and the wealth gap is widening between the rich and the poor.
The poverty situation is quite serious in Hong Kong.
There will be about 1.4 million Hong Kong people are in poverty.
Before the pandemic struck, the poor were already struggling to make a living. Now, in the economic aftermath of the outbreak, the poor have become more afraid and increasingly unsure about their future.
我每日最擔心嘅嘢都係租，因為你食你可以食好平嘅嘢，食少啲肉，食少啲豬肉，多啲食菜，諸如此類。但問題你租就你係 fix 咗一定要俾嘅。
低下層嘅人係最慘啦，即係差唔多叫做推我哋去懸崖咁滯㗎啦，即係而家都企喺懸崖邊㗎啦。
Will the poor of Hong Kong be able to survive the impact of the pandemic? And is there a way out of the seemingly endless cycle of poverty? It's another busy day in the central district of Hong Kong, a bustling metropolis of some 7.4 million people and home to some of the world's biggest banks and multinational companies. But amid the gleaming skyscrapers and luxury thoroughfares lies a neighborhood that appears stuck in a perpetual time warp. The streets are dotted with worn-down buildings and cramped apartments. They're also filled with a multitude of densely packed stalls and traders hawking their cheap and colorful ware. This is the working-class neighborhood of Sam Shui Po. It is a world apart from the opulence of Hong Kong's central district. It is here that some of the poorest of the city live, a place where life is pared down to basics. Mr. Lam is a 54-year-old single father living in this neighborhood. Home is a small 150 square feet subdivided flat that he shares with his teenage daughter. A subdivided flat is a standard apartment in Hong Kong which is split into multiple dwellings in order to maximize the number of people who can reside in a very small space. Inflated housing costs, astronomical rental rates, and difficult access to public housing have left many poor Hong Kongers with no other viable options but to live here. And Mr. Lam is one of them.
因為嗰份工冇咗之後咧，當你收入少咗嘅話咧，你以前嘅習慣要改變晒啦。劏房最大個問題，未住過當然唔知啦。第一就原來隔離屋啊，每日5點20分就開始切嘢拍蒜頭，唔知切乜嘢係砰砰聲，所以我每日5點20分就係 morning call 叫醒我。咁我間房已經係自己整晒啲隔音板啊、剩啊各樣啊，但係都唔得。水質啊較為差啦呢度，咁啊同埋嗰個水費、電費同正常嘅水務局同埋呢個中電嘅價錢係唔同嘅，不符㗎。好似水費1995年凍結到依家啦咁嘅樣，25年冇加過啦，咁佢都係用另外自己標準價。
Mr. Lam came to Hong Kong from the mainland with his family when he was about 3 years old. They came here in search of a better life. But things had not turned out the way he had hoped. He kept switching jobs to earn a better income.
第一份工就係16歲都未夠就做裁廠，即係裁衣服呢啲裁廠。咁啊做咗4年半啦，即係約莫20歲到咁啊轉行開始做飲食業。咁啊係啦，咁啊一路做咗幾間啦，咁第一間做咗8年半啦都，咁啊做海鮮嘅嗰陣時主要，咁然之後轉地咧就做潮州菜啊、粵菜啊咁樣，咁啊一頭揼尾都做咗超過30年啦。
嗱，我會買蕉啊，老細啊。
Mr. Lam is one of the 1.4 million people who are living just below the poverty line in Hong Kong. That represents around 20% of the population. According to a 2018 government report, the level of poverty is the highest in 10 years.
According to the Hong Kong government, they use the relative poverty concept to define poverty in Hong Kong. So if a household, their income is less than half of the median of that household size. For example, a 4-person household family in Hong Kong, if their income is less than $2,700, they can be classified as poor, according to the Hong Kong government. But if they are just 1-person family, so if they are less than about 512 US dollars, they will be classified as poor. So it is quite low for those 1-person and 2-person family because many of them are elderly people.
All his life, Mr. Lam has been moving from job to job to make ends meet. But since the pandemic struck, things have taken a turn for the worse. The city's borders have remained closed. Entire industries were also shut down almost overnight. Tourism has plunged to zero, and unemployment rate has surged to a nearly 16-year high at 6.4% as the city continues to feel the brunt of the economic fallout. The impact is also being deeply felt by Mr. Lam. He was asked to leave his job at a restaurant after a ban on social gathering and dine-in services came into force.
所以結果就係早2年問我咧，我都諗住我終身嘅職業係佢嘅。咁啊點知一個疫情就將我諗嘅嘢完全打垮晒。咁依家飲食業我覺得啊係冇得做㗎啦，嗰種除非疫情過咗去嘅啫。所以結果就因為其實我2月開始就已經冇接觸呢一行啦。咁結果就係等咗2個月之後無計可施咧，我嘗試轉行咯。先後做過啲夜間嘅桌球室嘅場務員啦。咁啊場務後尾亦都係因為疫情關閉咗，全部唔俾開啦。
Hong Kong GDP dropped by 9% in the first and the second quarter. So our GDP dropped. Our unemployment rate rise from 2.8% to 6.4% now. And the unemployment rate for people who live under poverty is even higher. So the impact is quite serious. Those live in poor condition, they are the ones who are more likely to be fired. So the situation is quite serious in Hong Kong. For like construction sector and for like catering, accommodation sector, the unemployment rate is double digit.
個失業嘅情況啊，譬如佢6.4%，一個10幾年嘅新高啦。開工不足嘅情況都好嚴重嘅，即係有啲行業咧，可能真係打份半工啊，出份半份糧咁樣都有。咁我諗真係要喺經濟方面，特別可能係喺一啲特別行業，譬如旅遊方面咧，其實都有好多從業員咧，即係面臨好大嘅困境。
Mr. Lam has since been getting help from the Society for Community Organizations, or SOCO, a grassroots organization dedicated to serving the poor and underprivileged. Ms. Si Lai Shan is a community organizer with SOCO and has been with the organization for over 15 years, helping those in need. She says the pandemic has caused the majority of those she serves to lose their jobs.
Actually, it's quite serious to affect those Hong Kong people But especially for the underprivileged, they are affected more by the COVID-19. We can see those they are underprivileged people, and many of them they have the job. But now, because of the pandemic, we can see around over 80% of them actually underemployed.
With little hope of returning to the food industry anytime soon, Mr. Lam took up a job at a mask-making factory with much lesser pay. Mask making is a booming industry, especially during the height of the pandemic. However, he did not stay long in the job due to stiff competition, stringent quality checks, and an oversupply of workers soon forced factories to lay off people.
因為口罩廠咧，依家都冇得做啦，叫做僧多粥少。聽講香港200幾間，咁亦都囤積咗超過5000個口罩啦，咁5000萬個 sorry。咁結果咧就我睇住公司嘅生意咧越嚟越差，我哋員工有80幾個，過去唔夠個月 cut 到剩翻唔夠10個。
Confronted with the possibility of a jobless future, Mr. Lam becomes constantly worried. He keeps asking himself if he could survive living in one of the most expensive cities in the world. Apart from having to pay for his rent and food, he still has to provide for his daughter's education and other personal needs.
所以只有以前嘅少少積蓄咧，就補貼落去，每個月爭幾多補貼幾多，就係咁嘅嘢，捱住先咯。希望個疫情快啲過。 咁啊，香港啲人可以過翻正常生活咯，叫做。我每日最擔心嘅嘢都係租，因為你食你可以食好平嘅嘢，食少啲肉，食少啲豬肉，多啲食菜，諸如此類。但問題你租就你係 fix 咗一定要俾嘅，同埋我好驚嘅就係，如果你嗰個月冇錢交租，或者遲咗交租，業主會點諗咧？會唔會明年我話加你嘅租加多啲咧？咁？ 即係呢啲係我嘅憂慮啦，叫做。
So it's double difficulty for those people. Inflation is high, the food is expensive, or even at the beginning the mask is so expensive, and then the income is decreased and so many problems. And even they have many extra needs they need to handle it because they need to have protection gears, they need to pay extra, or even their children they need to attend the online class. So they need to pay to the computer or more internet free, and maybe they don't have this kind of equipment, and they face many difficulties, and also they have more family conflicts.
The government has introduced several schemes in the form of wage subsidies to help employers retain their workers. Unfortunately, nearly 1/4 of employers who've benefited from the scheme do not keep their staff, especially after the pandemic started to eat into their bottom line. The unemployed also do not receive any financial assistance from the government.
The whole idea of the employment support scheme is to keep the employers afloat so they can keep the employees. If the employers cannot be kept afloat and closed down, then the people will lose their jobs.
In Hong Kong, we do not have like direct unemployment benefit for people to claim because we believe that if we have that unemployment benefit, people will become lazy and they will not go to work. And just like the European country, the benefits, if the benefit is too good, people will not want to work.
With the Hong Kong economy entering into its first recession in a decade, the effects are now being felt across all segments of the society, especially the poor. Faced with the prospects of mounting bills and no promise of a decent job, Mr. Lam's worries begin to grow with each passing day. How is he going to cope with the financial stress and anxiety in the coming days and months? Is there a way out of his predicament? With its soaring skyscrapers, Hong Kong has long been regarded as a prosperous and thriving metropolis. Its magnificent architectural landscape is a clear testament to its wealth and power. But amid the city's economic prosperity lies a dark side. There are many of those who are struggling in life and are priced out of the market. Many simply can't afford to buy a decent place they can call home. Thousands of them, especially the poor, are now living in partitioned apartments known as coffin homes. These tiny, cramped spaces in Yau Ma Tei are where some of the poor in Hong Kong seek shelter. 52-year-old former waiter Ah Kwok, not his real name, used to live in Shenzhen. He traveled to Hong Kong every day for work because he can't afford to buy or rent a decent apartment in Hong Kong. But ever since the pandemic struck, borders have shut and he has had to scramble to find a place to stay. With exorbitantly high rentals even during the current pandemic and global recession, he's forced to seek out cheaper accommodation elsewhere. And he ended up here at these coffin homes. Measuring just 3 by 6 square feet, is even smaller than a standard car park space. But that's all Ah Kwok can afford for now.
即係最主要單身啦，即係冇咩牽掛啦。即係我初都諗住呢度係暫時住1-2月嘅啫，我估唔到佢即係會搞到咁長時間啦。
Ah Kwok has been living in a coffin home for almost half a year now. The entire flat of 450 square feet, or the size of 3 single parking lots, is divided and shared with 19 other people. Ah Kwok, who's now unemployed, wants to move out of this place and has been actively looking for a job. But with borders shut, jobs have become scarce. He has been doing some cleaning jobs from time to time, just to get by. But what he earns is still not enough to cover his daily expenses, as the pay is just too low. Most of the time, he just stays in his bunk.
咁有時又得閒嘅，咁走去勞工處睇下咯，即係碰下運氣咯，即係差唔多大部分時間都喺張床度㗎啦，就係睇下手機咯，瞓覺咯，都係日日都係咁咯，即係都好少揾啲朋友㗎，即係你揾朋友出嚟咁樣。 其實佢仲即係佢嘅心情仲反正同你差唔多嘅，佢都係揾緊嘢做。即係我亦都唔想嘥啲咁嘅時間。通常我夜晚10點幾我就瞓㗎啦，瞓唔着諗下嘢咯，諗下之前點啊，點解而家又咁樣啊咁樣，即係反思下啦。你10幾20年前你揾份嘢做，大班人請你啦，搶住請你啦。你而家係你行出去揾份嘢做，人哋都唔睬你啊！ 我曾經見過一份工，我就做嗰個去啲餐廳做嗰啲侍應啊，即係我又唔係咁熟啦，做侍應其實，即係我都係睇冇彩嘅啫。嗰個老闆娘同我講話：你年紀都唔細啦，唞下啦，翻去咁樣。
Adding to their misery is the unaffordable housing market. A small 363 square feet apartment in Hong Kong can easily cost $1 million or more. For the tiny space that Ah Kwok currently occupies, he still has to pay about $230 a month. With no cooking facility available, he has to buy his own food. That will cost him an additional $13 a day.
我哋呢度係冇得煮食㗎，冇廚房㗎，唯有出街買外賣咯，自己慳啲啦，一日慳啲啦，就住用啦啲錢，聽日唔知有冇工返，有冇收入，留翻啲錢交租啦，梗係要。
Our housing price problem is very complicated. There are a lot of causes. One of the causes, U.S. policy. We are linked to the Hong Kong dollar, U.S. play money. Then we have to, our housing price will go up. Second, we are more and more open up and integrated with China. A lot of Chinese students come to Hong Kong to study. We receive more than 10 to 20,000 students at least every year. So they have to rent an apartment in Hong Kong if they cannot get the accommodation in school. So that also push up the rent. And also don't forget, China, 20 years ago, China basically doesn't have any foreign reserves. But now China has more than $3 trillion US. Even 2% of this $3 trillion come to Hong Kong, it can buy up all the new apartment in Hong Kong. So the housing price is expensive because we target ourselves as a financial center, and the land that we have is very limited.
Their rent is crazy, okay? They just increase one-fold or two-fold just 2 or 3 years' time. So it is quite hard for you to survive in Hong Kong. Many low-income families use more than 40% or 50% of their incomes for their housing.
咁首先就係話，即係香港嘅地價係真係好貴嘅嚇。咁啊土地亦都唔多啦，本身係我哋都見得到係即係可發展做住宅嘅土地咧都唔多嘅，所以喺政府賣一啲即係私營地出邊咧，咁啊越嚟越貴，咁變咗令到成個樓市咧其實喺過去喺我諗03年雖然有一個經濟嘅逆轉啦，咁但係都隨後咧其實都開始恢復翻，咁亦都係開始向上升，咁亦都超過咗97年個水平添咁樣，所以而家越嚟越即係難以去負擔一啲所謂私人樓宇個價格。內地可能有啲嘅所謂投資者啦，不論係買房屋或者土地都好咧，其實都令到香港呢一個嘅即係相對比較資源短缺嘅情況之下咧，都會競爭多咗嚇。咁你睇翻譬如買家印花稅咧，呢幾年其實嗰個嘅所謂境外買家去買香港嘅一啲物業嘅話咧，咁會有個稅額要去收翻嘅。咁其實喺18、19年咧，個稅額達到係90幾億嘅收入，即係證明咗呢個香港嘅樓房咧，喺不論香港又好咧，或者外地咧，以至內地嘅朋友都好咧，都係好受歡迎嘅。
With an ever-growing demand for space in the tiny territory, property developers have moved in to take advantage of the growing market for all it's worth. Today, there are an estimated 200,000 people in Hong Kong living in such tiny subdivided units. Still, in spite of all the harsh realities, 31-year-old Sai Lo has not abandoned his dream of owning a better house one day. The former convict feels that he still has a future ahead of him, even after he was put out of a job in the catering industry when the pandemic struck. But for now, he has to accept life for what it is, living in a coffin home, sharing a space of about 500 square feet with 20 other people.
係人都想住大屋嘅咧，有想住呢個嘅，會有個 plan 咯，去 plan 定，因為等疫情咗之後會繼續揾餐入月嚟翻，去儲落錢啦，就會去住得好啲啊，衣食住行全部都係行呢4個先嘅啦，冇人哋咁富有，人窮志不窮嘛。
But adjusting to life inside the coffin home can be unbearable for him at times.
最大困難真係唔識人啊！真係唔識佢哋嗰啲性格係咩嘅，好多時想去遷就佢，都係冇乜頭緒，可以走邊條路去遷就到佢。我朝頭早瞓覺，夜晚先出嚟蒲。我朝頭早好多人喺度嘈，即係正常運作嗰陣。我如果冇瞓得咁冧嘅話，聽到聲我好敏。
所以你話如果真係要回應到香港市民要喺住屋方面咧，喺地方面的確要增加啦。咁另外我諗喺而家因為樓價私人樓宇樓價好高咧，政府亦都喺前年轉咗一個所謂公私型房屋嘅比例嘅供應個目標，多咗係所謂公營房屋，譬如一啲資助性質嘅一啲房屋。咁呢啲我相信希望就可以增加多呢啲嘅供應上面， 即係能夠令一啲相對比較中下階層嘅市民咧，係可以負擔到呢啲咁嘅私人樓宇嘅價格。公營房屋特別我哋所謂出租公屋方面咧，滿足唔到啲基層市民可以上樓嘅情況，所以佢哋會選擇多啲就環境差啲又好，租金貴啲都好咧，都會租住呢啲嘅所謂唔係咁理想嘅房間住先。咁希望可以喺中間一個過渡時間咧，就可以之後可以上到去公屋咁樣。所以呢啲都係我哋見得到好多，譬如住喺呢啲環境好差衞生又好啦，或者空氣都唔流通嘅情況之下咧，都叫做屈居於呢啲地方情況都有發生。
Silo has been getting help from SOCO to help him deal with life's pressures. The organization has been visiting people who live in these coffin homes to distribute masks and sanitizers in hope to ward off a COVID outbreak in these crowded spaces. To occupy his time, Silo has started to do volunteer work with the organization, hoping to help others who are in a similar situation as him.
而家有散工就會返散工，冇散工就做義工。因為師姑娘同埋其他義工都係女仔嚟嘅，諗下啲嘢都有啲重。我就跟住我就開始去做，即係去幫佢哋攞下嘢。呢啲居住環境，我而家都係住喺呢啲地方嘛，所以佢哋需要啲咩，我會比較清楚啲，所以又繼續去 keep 住做義工去幫佢哋。
你貴姓啊？識下你先啊。Actually, it's quite challenging for us because during this kind of period, and you need to work according to the guideline from the social welfare department or from the government. There are many restrictions. You cannot take contact with people, but we are facing a pressing demand of the lower class. So we cannot just keep a distance from those people. So we need to overwork and overtime to help these people immediately.
At 31, time is on Silo's side. He can still re-enter the labor force and achieve his life's ambition once the economy improves and when the global pandemic situation begins to ease. But for those entering into the twilight years of their lives, many are facing a grim future. How does the government of Hong Kong respond to the needs of its poor elderly population in the midst of a pandemic and economic slump? It's a warm Monday afternoon in Kowloon City. A frail-looking elderly woman is busy collecting discarded cardboard boxes outside a supermarket, completely oblivious to the streams of people who are rushing up and down the scorching pathways as they go about their daily business. It's a familiar sight here in Hong Kong, especially in the poorest parts of the island. 95-year-old Sri Lai, or affectionately known as Pawpaw, has been collecting disused cardboard and other scrap since she was in her 40s. She would start her day early in the morning and would only return home late at night after selling what she has collected to a recycling center. For all her day's work, she received around $6.
即係而家年紀大咗咪辛苦咯，年紀大咗隻腳唔聽使嘛。淨係執紙嚟嘅啫，慳慳地咪夠咯。朝頭早飲茶都飲2-3蚊。
People around her age would normally be too weak to venture out and work. Instead, they would be spending their time at home, enjoying their retirement years. But not Sri Lai Pawpaw. With no savings and family support, she roams the streets every day from sunrise to sunset, scavenging for plastic and cardboard to earn enough money in order to feed herself. Madam Shui Lai is among Hong Kong's rapidly growing aging population, a significant portion of which lives in poverty.
要執啊，唔執點得？我又冇去政府攞錢，我又攞唔到嗰啲公援，你有得住有得食，咁咪求其做下咯。
According to a 2018 government report, there are about 360,000 Hong Kongers over the age of 65 who now live in poverty. They constitute about 25% of the city's elderly population. The city also has the longest life expectancy, and that makes it harder for them to sustain themselves financially without proper support and adequate savings.
Hong Kong now is the place where people have the longest life expectancy at birth, where now we outlive Japanese people, we outlive people in Switzerland. So the expected age to live for men is 81, 82, for women is 87, 187. So the problem is, the aging problem is actually, we have more people retired than people who enter in the labor force.
So we note that the living standard of the poor people, poor elderly, is really low. Many of them still try to go to the wet market in very late, so they can just pick up some rotten vegetables, rotten fish, as such. I don't think it is acceptable in such affluent city, such developed city.
When she was young, Shui Lai helped her father run a stall selling Chinese soups at the dockyard. After the closure of the store, she found a job at a weaving factory. Her life was stable then, but only for a while.
做下咧，3個細路咧，我細路有事佢唔俾我告假，咁我就唔做，咁咪走出嚟賣街邊咯。 賣街邊啦，賣街邊又冇得做啦，起晒嗰啲街市啦，頭又貴啦，頭啲位，咪走出嚟出紙皮啊！
With little education, there was little that she could do to improve her life. Scavenging disused cardboards, therefore, was the only option she felt she had left to earn some money. And this is what she's been doing for almost 50 years. Ironically, many of these senior citizens, known by their nickname cardboard grannies, are fiercely independent. They'd like to continue working and feel useful instead of relying on handouts.
You've seen some of the pictures of the old ladies picking up cardboards on the streets, collecting them. And these are most of the people. We have actually NGOs trying to approach them and help them. And said that, why don't you apply for welfare? And they said, no, I want to, no matter how hard my life is, I still want to live on my own hands. So there are indeed people in the community who refuse to be helped, or they don't want to seek help from the government. So what we've been offering some of the assistance, but they're not always welcoming such assistance from the government.
Originally, the civil societies organization and the NGOs is fighting for a universal retirement benefit for the elderly in Hong Kong. So it should be a funded scheme, so we can have a saving for all, and then it's a universal scheme. But the government rejected it.
Madam Shui Lai has 4 daughters and a son, but she doesn't expect any help from any of them. She thinks that her children have their own problems to manage and does not want to be a burden to them.
應該就係退休，但係你退休咧，你樣樣都要攞錢，啲細路又唔俾得幾多你，佢個個有細路。
Life's a lot harder during the pandemic. There are not so many people who are out on the streets. There's less economic activity and therefore less boxes to collect. Usually, she's able to get about $6 a day. However, today, she has only managed to get $3 from what she has gathered. The reality is, the elderly people are more vulnerable to the current pandemic. But she's not worried about the possibility of contracting the disease.
你戴翻口罩咪唔怕，戴翻口罩唔怕啦。不過而家年紀大，隻腳又冇乜力啦，隻腳冇乜力。
夠唔夠口罩啊你？
夠，好多人俾你我。
咁但係即係咧怕唔怕？因為都年紀大嘅，嗰個病咧就專係即係年紀大嗰啲就會危險啲啊嘛！你擔唔擔心啊？
唔擔心，年紀大咪由得佢咯。擔心咩啫？好多次。
如果病咗有冇諗過？如果真係病咗或者感染到點算啊？
咪入醫院咯。
Madam Srilai is barely scraping by, especially during the pandemic. But she's determined to continue working, pushing her trolley loaded with cardboard through the city until she can't do so anymore. And there are many poor people like her who are struggling and fighting to cope and survive during their twilight years. But for how long? Can they free themselves from the vicious cycle of poverty? And what will happen if another wave of infection returns and hits the city? Hong Kong has long earned the reputation as the land of the super rich. The city today has 96 billionaires with a combined wealth of about $280 billion. But it's also known as the land of the mega poor. Over 1 million of Hong Kong's 7.4 million people live below the poverty line. According to a 2016 report by aid agency Oxfam, the monthly income of the top 10% of Hong Kong's residents was almost 44 times that of the bottom 10%. And the divide between the haves and the have-nots have grown over the years.
根據嗰個18年嘅一個報告裏邊講咧，就應該大概140萬人度咧，就係屬於貧窮線嘅。咁但係亦都經過如果一啲政策嘅介入，譬如話咩嘅介入咧，就譬如係一啲現金津貼嘅計劃啦，入住咗公營房屋公屋嘅部分咧，因為佢個租金會平好多，咁就會將嗰個140萬人口就會降低到100萬咁上下度嚇。咁但係100萬都唔係一個小數目嚇，香港700萬人口嘅話都佔咗可能1/6、1/7度。咁但係香港嘅經濟其實係都比較前列啦喺世界上面。咁但係嗰個貧富懸殊嘅問題咧，的確係喺呢好多年咧，喺香港都係一個好頭痛嘅問題。點樣去滅貧啊？或者將一啲財富可以令到創造一啲財富俾一啲基層市民咧，都係值得要關注嘅地方。
But creating wealth has proven to be very challenging, especially in the current environment. The city has been hit by a double whammy of a continuing political unrest and the COVID-19 pandemic, key factors which have contributed to the current economic slowdown. And the impact is keenly felt by the low-income families who are struggling to make ends meet. Hong Kong has already been hit by 3 waves of COVID infections so far. And the city's health minister has warned that with the winter season, a 4th wave can happen anytime. Our Kwok is hoping that the pandemic will end soon, so that it will help alleviate the suffering for people like him. With no job and no future to look forward to, he's getting very restless and desperate, unsure where his next meal is going to come from and if he'll be able to continue to pay his rent. Every day he's cooped up in his cramped cage home, praying for better days to come.
唔好咁大希望，即係揾到兩餐有地方住，算㗎啦，即係唔望咁多嘢㗎啦。即係望政府咧就業嗰方面咧就着緊啲咯，即係俾多啲機會啲人，即係有多啲就業職位啊咁樣，即係咁樣好啲咯，變咗。如果唔係你咁樣一路落去咧，最慘嗰啲係我哋呢啲人啦，即係低下層嘅人係最慘啦，即係差唔多叫做推我哋去懸崖咁滯㗎啦，即係而家都企喺懸崖邊㗎啦。你如果政府你唔再搞呢個就業即係計劃咧，係真係嗌啲人真係跳落去嘅。
Mr. Lam, on the other hand, tries very hard to stay healthy, especially during the current pandemic. He's extremely afraid about the prospect of falling ill one day. That's because getting sick is just too expensive for poor people like himself.
本身咧呢個疫情咧，我就好小心㗎，我自己好小心，因為我係佢2號嗰日啊，我冇記錯就7月2號嗰日，即係啱啱開始1號開始就係2號我已經開始做呢個檢疫。咁啊當然啦，佢係好快啊，2日後就已經短信話俾我聽係陰性冇事。咁啊同埋好多消毒用品啊各樣啦，嗰樣嘢我覺得冇得慳嘅。咁啊，所以我做到足嘅，甚至乎我翻嚟屋企咧，我都要踩一踩嗰塊稀釋咗嘅跳水嘅氈咁嘅樣。即係呢一方面我好緊張啦，叫做咁啊，同埋個女我都要去做晒咁多樣嘢。係啊，所以就又係諗盡辦法咯。例如我有咩辦法唔好病啊，唔好，因為我以前成日經常性感冒、傷風咁嘅樣。咁啊睇一睇醫生290蚊，如果政府醫院排又唔知排幾耐咁嘅樣。咁啊左抄右抄咁喺上網嗰度抄到之後咧，就有個方法，原來浸蒜頭醋。咁啊好啦，既然咁樣我照去啦，照食啦咁呢樣嘢就原來都相當好㗎。唔係一個女我都叫初初逼佢食，咁依家佢都自願去食嘅，即係咁嘅樣嘅。
There is some hope on the horizon. Hong Kong's long recession has shown signs of easing, buoyed by gradual improvement both in domestic economic activities and external demand. The recovery of the Chinese economy also plays a big part in helping other exporting economies in Asia with the much-needed source of demand. The main priority of the Hong Kong government now is to prevent a fourth wave of infections from hitting the city, so as to avoid another wave of economic pain.
So the most important thing is to try to avoid that possibility of having the fourth wave. There will be different measures in terms of import control, and we are still working on some of the holes in our systems. We've been improving them from time to time. We are still tightening up some of the import controls from the high-risk countries coming back to Hong Kong. Now, just in case the fourth wave comes, then definitely the first line we have to make sure is we have sufficient facilities to look after the infected.
I would say if there is a fourth pandemic or it is quite a while, not just 1 month or a half month, this creates quite a problem, because I think many saving or reserve of the poor people already just or have 1 month or half month. If they do not have the incomes, what they can do, they will become homeless.
The coming months will be very crucial for Hong Kong. Not only does it have to prevent another surge of infections, the government also has to ensure that its economy will remain on a recovery path so as to help ease the burden of the more vulnerable segments of the population, especially the poor. But the reality is, Months of protests have left the society deeply divided between the pro-democracy and pro-establishment camps. High unemployment, widening income gap, skyrocketing property prices, and the lack of affordable housing have led to the growing discontent among the people. Can the government act fast enough to reduce the economic and financial pain suffered by the people?
The social movement last year actually revealed that Hong Kong society are very divided. And actually, because of this social movement, we scare away a lot of tourists, scare away a lot of investment. So the Hong Kong economy dropped by like negative 2.9% in the last 2 quarters of last year. The central government also launched this national security law because of this protest. This law, of course, I believe it will have a stabilization impact on the Hong Kong society. It will make Hong Kong society more stable. But still, I think the problem is not that you are able to suppress those people by force. You may need to address their grievance. So to address their grievance, you may use economic means first. For example, whether you can provide them with a decent living condition, jobs, and so on. But now it seems that there's still a lot of grievance among the young people, among the poor people in Hong Kong.
I'm worried. We've been still thinking of any possible actions in the coming 1 or 2 months, because the fourth wave, if it comes, it will be likely around December or January. And we do actually expect some job losses after the end of our employment support scheme. And so we've been still thinking hard on what can we do more to help.
As the pandemic continues to inflict pain across Hong Kong, many are holding on to what little they have, hoping to ride out the storm and outlive one of the biggest tests of their lives. For Ah Kwok, however, he seems to have lost all hope in life amidst the deepening poverty. Whatever little dream that he had left has now been swept away by the pandemic. For now, he intends to live from day to day, taking each day as it comes, trying to survive the challenge in an uncertain future.
唔抱呢啲希望啦，即係平平淡淡算啦。即係就算俾我有錢都好，即係我都會做下啲善事，即係幫助有需要嘅人咯。因為自己經歷過啊嘛，嗰個時勢係過咗去啦，過咗去㗎啦，你係冇機會再重做一樣嘢改變唔到嘅好似而家你而家嘅香港同10幾20年前嘅香港係兩回事嚟，根本完全兩回事因為自己睇晒㗎嘛，係完全兩回事你10幾20年前你揾份嘢做，大把人請你啦，搶住請你啦。你而家係你行出去揾份嘢做，人哋都唔睬你啊！唔諗呢樣嘢啦，今日唔知聽日事，係咪先即係有時每個人生老病死都唔知係咪先諗嚟都冇用。我話呢個問題我考慮咗好耐，我都冇去攞，因為幫唔到我咩嘅，其實都冇乜為